The first thing I saw wasn't Ethan. It was the two empty chairs in the front row. They were supposed to be filled before I even stepped into the aisle. My mother always said she'd be early for my wedding, earlier than everyone else, just to make sure everything looked right. My father was supposed to stand when the music started the way he had at my brother's graduation, at every event that mattered. But when the doors opened and I took that first step forward, those two seats were empty. No coats draped over them, no purses, no sign that anyone had even tried to come and change their mind at the last minute. Just empty. I remember thinking maybe they're late, not in a hopeful way, more like a reflex, something my brain reached for because the alternative didn't make sense. The chapel wasn't large. Everyone else was already seated. Ethan was waiting at the front, his hands clasped, his eyes fixed on me in that steady way he always had. But those two seats stayed empty. No one turned around. No one whispered. The absence sat there in plain sight, visible to every single person in that room. I kept walking. Ethan's father, David, met me halfway down the aisle, like we had planned. He gave my arm a gentle squeeze, the kind that didn't ask questions. He didn't look at the chairs. He didn't need to. When I reached the front, I didn't look back. The ceremony went on exactly the way it was supposed to. The officiant spoke. Ethan said his vows. I said mine. People smiled, some of them teary, some of them trying too hard to pretend everything was normal. No one mentioned the empty seats. Not during the ceremony, not during the reception, not even later when people hugged me a little longer than usual and said things like, "It was beautiful," or "You look so happy." Happy wasn't the word I would have used. After the reception, when it was just the two of us back in the hotel room, Ethan finally asked, "Did they call?" I shook my head. No missed calls, no texts, no voicemail, nothing. It wasn't just that they didn't show up. It was that they disappeared. The next morning didn't change anything. Neither did the day after that, or the week after. No explanation, no apology, no acknowledgement that something had happened, something that everyone else in that room had seen, even if no one had said it out loud. At first, I told myself it had to be a reason. Something real, an emergency, a misunderstanding. But the longer the silence stretched, the harder it became to hold on to that. Because this wasn't the first time they had chosen not to be there. It was just the first time they had done it in a room where no one could pretend otherwise. And sitting there days later, replaying that moment in my head, I realized something I hadn't let myself say before. Those seats hadn't been empty by accident. They had been left empty on purpose. It would have been easier if that moment at the wedding had been the first time. If I could point to those two empty chairs and say, that's when everything changed. But the truth is, nothing changed that day. It just became impossible to ignore. I grew up in a house where things were never said out loud. Not directly, not in a way you could argue with. There were no dramatic fights, no slammed doors, no moments you could point to and call unfair. It was quieter than that. My parents, Richard and Diane Bennett, believed in being practical. They didn't waste words. They didn't explain decisions. They just made them and expected everyone else to adjust. Most of the time I did. My younger brother Noah was 2 years behind me. When he was born, my mother used to say he needed more attention because he was sensitive. That word followed him everywhere. Sensitive meant he needed a quieter room, a better school, more support. It also meant that whatever was left over was enough for me. I didn't think of it as unfair back then. I thought of it as normal. When I was in high school, I worked evenings at a bookstore near our neighborhood in Austin. It wasn't because anyone told me I had to. It just felt like something I should do. If I wanted money for college applications, for gas, for anything extra, I figured it was my responsibility. Noah didn't work. My parents said he needed to focus on school, that his workload was heavier, that he'd get overwhelmed. I remember coming home one night still in my work apron and seeing a brand new laptop sitting on the kitchen counter. It was for Noah. My father said it would help him stay organized. I had been using the same old desktop computer in the corner of the living room for years. I didn't ask for one. I told myself I didn't need it. That was how it always worked. Not by taking something away from me, but by giving something extra to him and letting the difference speak for itself. When it came time for college, the pattern held. I got into the University of Texas with a partial scholarship. I remember being proud of that. It felt like proof that all the late nights, all the extra hours at the bookstore had meant something. My parents congratulated me. They said they were proud. Then they asked how I planned to cover the rest. There wasn't an argument. There wasn't even hesitation. Just a question. I took out student loans. I worked part-time. I made it work. 2 years later, when Noah got into a smaller private college outside Dallas, my parents had a different conversation. They talked about investing in his future. They talked about how important it was for him to have the right environment. They didn't ask him how he planned to pay for it. They paid. Tuition, housing, everything. I remember sitting at the kitchen table during one of my visits home, listening to them discuss it like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. And maybe to them it was. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was independent, that I didn't need the same kind of support. That being able to take care of myself was something to be proud of. I believed that for a long time, even after I graduated, even after I started sending them money, $400 a month, because it felt like something a daughter should do. They never asked for it. But they never told me to stop either, and they never said thank you. Looking back now, it's easy to draw a straight line from those moments to the empty seats at my wedding. But at the time, it never felt like one thing. It felt like a series of small, reasonable choices. Choices that only started to look different when you put them side by side. Sitting there days after the wedding, replaying everything in my head, I realized something else. There had been signs. Not loud ones, not obvious ones. Just details that didn't quite fit. Numbers that didn't match what I thought I knew about our family. At the time, I had ignored them because it was easier. But now, for the first time, I couldn't. The first time I noticed it, I almost dismissed it as a mistake. It was a Tuesday afternoon, about a week after the wedding. I was back at my desk at the admissions office, walking a student through financial aid forms, trying to settle back into something that felt like normal. Numbers, deadlines, documents, things that followed rules, things that made sense. After the student left, I opened my email and saw a notification from the county appraisal district. At first, I assumed it was spam. I didn't own any property. I had never owned any property. But the subject line had my name in it, spelled correctly, with my full middle initial. I clicked it. It was a routine notice, something about a property tax update in Williamson County, just north of Austin. There was an address listed, one I didn't recognize. A small, single-family home on a street I'd never heard of. I stared at it for a few seconds, trying to place it. Then I saw the line that made me pause. Associated Party, Ava M. Bennett. That was me. I read it again slower this time. Associated Party didn't mean owner. It didn't even necessarily mean responsibility. It was vague enough to be meaningless, but specific enough that it shouldn't have been there by accident. I leaned back in my chair, my eyes still fixed on the screen. My parents had always been clear about one thing: they didn't have investment properties. They had said it in different ways over the years. When money came up, when I asked about college, when I tried to understand why things worked the way they did. We keep things simple, my father used to say. Simple didn't include rental homes in another county. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe my name had been added by mistake. Maybe it was a clerical error. Those happened all the time. I saw them every day at work: misspelled names, mismatched records, documents that didn't quite line up. Still, something about it didn't sit right. I clicked through to the county website and searched the address. The property pulled up immediately. 2-bedroom house, built in the late 1980s. Current tax status active. Under ownership details, I saw my father's name, Richard Bennett. That made sense, but underneath that, there was another line. Additional associated individual, Ava M. Bennett. Again, I felt a small shift in my chest. Not panic, not yet, just something tightening, like a thread being pulled. I tried to remember if there had ever been a moment where something like this was mentioned. A conversation I hadn't paid attention to. A document I had signed without thinking. Nothing came to mind. Ethan would have said something if this made sense. When I got home that evening, I showed him the email on my phone while he was making dinner. He wiped his hands on a towel and leaned closer, reading it twice. "Have you ever seen that address before?" he asked. I shook my head. "Did you ever co-sign anything? Loans, property, anything like that?" "Number." I was sure of that. Ethan didn't say anything right away. He wasn't the kind of person who jumped to conclusions. That was one of the things I trusted about him. "It could be nothing," he said finally. "Some kind of reporting error." "Yeah," I said. That was the reasonable answer. That was the answer that fit with everything I had told myself for years, that there was always a logical explanation, that nothing was being hidden, that whatever felt off probably wasn't. But as I stood there in our kitchen, watching the screen dim in my hand, I realized something. If it was a mistake, it was a very specific one. My full name, attached to a property I had never seen, in a county I had never dealt with. Mistakes didn't usually look that deliberate. I didn't say that out loud. Not to Ethan, not even to myself. But for the first time, the question didn't go away when I closed the screen. It stayed there, quiet, waiting. It was a Wednesday morning when my receptionist called upstairs. "Ava, there's someone here to see you." I was in the middle of reviewing a financial aid appeal, red pen in hand, numbers scattered across my desk. The kind of work that required focus, where one wrong entry could change the outcome of someone's entire year. "Do they have an appointment?" I asked, not looking up. There was a pause on the other end. "No," she said. "He says it's family patient." Something in the way she said it made me stop. I set the pen down slowly. "Who is it?" Another pause. "Your father." For a second, I didn't move. My father didn't come to my office. Not for birthdays. Not for milestones. Not even when I graduated and started this job. He had never once stepped into this building. And now he was downstairs. "Tell him I'm in a meeting," I said automatically. I needed time. A few minutes to think, to understand why he would show up here of all places. "I tried," she said quietly. "He said he'd wait." Of course he would. That was how he operated. Not loud, not demanding, just present in a way that made leaving him there feel like the wrong choice. I closed the file in front of me, stacking the papers neatly, even though my hands didn't feel steady. "I'll come down," I said. The walk from my office to the front lobby felt longer than it usually did. Each step carried a kind of weight I couldn't quite name yet. Not fear exactly, but something close. When I turned the corner, I saw him immediately. Richard Bennett. He was standing near the reception desk, holding a worn brown accordion folder against his chest. His posture was straighter than usual, like he was trying to take up less space and more at the same time. He looked older. I don't mean in the obvious ways, gray hairlines around his eyes. Those had been there for years. It was something else. A kind of tightness in his face, like he hadn't been sleeping well. He was wearing one of his better shirts, the kind he saved for events. Not my wedding. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he nodded a small, controlled movement, as if we were colleagues meeting in a hallway. "Ava?" I didn't return the nod. "What are you doing here?" Not angry. Not yet. Just direct. He shifted the folder slightly in his hands. "I need to talk to you," he said. "It's important." I glanced toward the reception desk. A couple of students were sitting nearby, pretending not to listen, but clearly aware of us. This wasn't a place for conversations that mattered. "There's a conference room," I said, already turning. He followed me without question. The room was small, just a table and a few chairs, the kind used for quick meetings. I closed the door behind us, the click louder than it should have been. For a second, we stood there, facing each other across the table. I waited. If he was going to explain why he hadn't shown up, why neither of them had, this was the moment. He didn't. "I know you're upset about the wedding," he said, his voice measured. Upset. The word landed flat. I didn't respond. He didn't apologize. Instead, he set the folder down on the table between us. His fingers lingered on it for a second, like he was deciding whether to let go. "This isn't about that," he continued. "This is about something we need to handle." I felt that same tightening in my chest from a few days ago, sitting at my desk, staring at that email. "What is it?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he opened the folder. Inside were documents. Not just one or two, but a stack neatly organized, clipped together, the kind of paperwork that suggested time planning intention. He pulled out a set of pages and slid them across the table toward me. "They've been asking questions," he said. "Who has?" "The county. About one of the properties." The word properties caught my attention immediately. Plural. I looked down at the papers, not touching them yet. My name was there. I could see it from where I stood. Ava M. Bennett. Again, the same way it had appeared in that email. Slowly I sat down. For the first time since I walked into that room, I felt something shift. Not clarity, not understanding. Just the sense that whatever this was, it wasn't small. And it wasn't a mistake. My father kept his hand on the folder for 1 second too long. That was what I noticed first. Not the papers themselves, not my name on the top page, just that brief hesitation, like some part of him understood that once he let go, whatever had been held together inside our family for years would start to come apart. I pulled the first document closer. It wasn't a deed exactly. At least, not one I recognized right away. It was a property management agreement tied to the house in Williamson County, the same address I had seen online. My father's name appeared in multiple places, so did mine. Not as a tenant, not as a witness, as an interested owner. I looked up at him. "What is this?" He sat down across from me and folded his hands as if that might make him appear calmer than he was. "It was set up years ago," he said. "You didn't need to be involved." That answer did something worse than anger. It confirmed that this was real. I turned to the next page, then the next. There were tax records, insurance documents, a refinance statement from years earlier. My name kept appearing in quiet, official places, woven into paperwork I had never seen attached to decisions I had never made. One of the pages listed proceeds from a home equity line. Another referenced repairs and capital improvements on related family property. There was more than one house. He had said one of the properties. I understood that now. "How many?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. "Your mother and I handled things the way we thought made sense at the time." That wasn't a number. I looked back down at the stack. A second property appeared in Travis County. Smaller, older, but active. The forms were clipped with bank correspondence and something that looked like rental income summaries. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat now. Not because I understood everything on the table. I didn't, but I understood enough. This hadn't happened once. It had been managed, maintained, carried forward year after year, using my name. I reached the last group of papers and found the document he had meant for me to see first. A release, formal, cleanly written, prepared in advance. It stated that I acknowledged having no further claim, no unresolved interest, no demand for review relating to the listed properties and associated transactions. My signature line was marked with a sticky tab. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I looked at him again. "You came here for this?" He swallowed, and for the first time since I'd walked into that room, he seemed tired instead of controlled. "The county flagged discrepancies," he said. "Some records don't match the current ownership structure. If this gets examined any further, it becomes complicated." Complicated. That was the word he chose. Not wrong, not hidden, not done without my knowledge. Complicated. "And you thought I'd just sign?" His eyes dropped to the table. "I thought we could handle this privately. Privately. Like the wedding silence. Like the years of small decisions that had never been explained because no one expected me to ask." In that moment, something inside me settled into place. Not clarity, not revenge, nothing dramatic. Just a line. A quiet one, but final. I had spent most of my life making myself easier for other people to manage. Easier to disappoint. Easier to leave out, easier to use without discussion. I looked at the yellow tab, marking where I was supposed to sign, and I understood that if I did it now, I would be agreeing to more than a document. I would be agreeing to the version of my life they had written without me. I set the papers down carefully. Then I slid the release back across the table. "I'm not signing anything today," I said. My father didn't argue. He just looked at me the way people do when a door closes softly enough that they can't pretend they didn't hear it shut. For the first time since those empty chairs at my wedding, I knew one thing for certain. The silence was over. I took the folder home with me. My father hadn't asked for it back. He had just stood there in that little conference room, staring at the unsigned release, as if he still believed I might change my mind if he waited long enough. When I finally stood, I gathered every page into the brown accordion folder and carried it out under my arm like something fragile and contaminated at the same time. Ethan was already home when I walked in. He looked up from the kitchen table the second he saw my face. He didn't ask how my day was. He didn't ask whether I was hungry. He just pulled out the chair across from him and waited while I set the folder down between us. For the next hour, we went through the papers one by one. Property management agreements, insurance forms, tax records, bank correspondence, refinance paperwork. My name appeared too many times to explain away, sometimes in full, sometimes with my middle initial, always official, always placed exactly where it would matter later. Ethan didn't interrupt much. That was one of the reasons I trusted him. He let facts settle before he reached for meaning. When he finally leaned back in his chair, his face had changed. "This wasn't casual," he said. I already knew that, but hearing someone else say it made the room feel smaller. "They kept this going for years," he added, "and they needed your signature now for a reason." I looked down at the release again. The yellow tab still marked the line where I was supposed to sign, like this had all been arranged before my father ever walked into my office. "What if I had?" I asked quietly. Ethan didn't answer right away. Then whatever they did would have been a lot harder to question. That was the moment it stopped feeling like a family misunderstanding and started feeling like a choice. Not one bad decision, not one desperate shortcut, a structure, a plan, something maintained over time, because no one expected me to stop cooperating. I didn't cry. I thought I might, but I didn't. Instead, I made copies. Every page, every signature, every date. Ethan fed the printer while I checked the order twice. The sound of paper sliding through the tray felt steadier than I did. Then I called my mother. Diane answered on the fourth ring. Her voice was calm, in that clipped way it got when she wanted to sound reasonable. "Ava." I didn't waste time. Dad came to my office today. A pause. Not surprise, just calculation. He told me he might. I looked across the table at Ethan. "He brought documents with my name on them," I said. "Properties, loans, a release form." Another pause. Then she sighed, as if I were making something simple unnecessarily difficult. "Your father and I did what families do," she said. "We managed things where they were needed." Needed. The word landed harder than I expected. "So you used my name without telling me." It wasn't like that. That was the first denial. Immediate, smooth, practiced. But she didn't say no. She didn't say I was wrong. She said, "You've always been the strong one, Ava. We knew you'd be fine." I closed my eyes for 1 second. There it was, the old family logic. No one needed. I adjusted. They decided. I absorbed. Not this time. "I'm not signing anything," I said. Her voice sharpened. "Don't be dramatic. I'm done being convenient." The silence on the other end changed then. It was no longer parental, no longer tired. It had edges. "If you push this," she said carefully, "you could make a mess that hurts everyone." Everyone. Not me. Not what had been done in my name. Just everyone. When the call ended, I set my phone down very gently. I understood something then that I should have understood years earlier. My parents were not afraid of the truth. They were afraid of losing control of it. And for the first time in my life, I stopped trying to protect them from what came next. The letter went out on a Friday. By Monday morning, nothing felt contained anymore. I was at my desk when Megan Clark called. She didn't waste time with small talk. They responded, she said. Megan was a real estate and fiduciary attorney based in Austin. I had found her through a colleague who said she didn't just read documents, she understood patterns. After one meeting, she had said something that stayed with me. This isn't about one property. It's about how your name was used to hold structure together. That was when I knew I had made the right call. What did they say? I asked. They're pushing back on the scope, she said. They're claiming everything was done with implied consent, family arrangement. Of course they were. The phrase sounded clean, reasonable, like something that didn't need to be examined too closely. They also requested that all communication go through their attorney from here on out. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the stack of copied documents on my desk. My name was still visible on the top page. Who's representing them? I asked. Megan gave me the name. A firm downtown. Established. Experienced. This wasn't going to stay small. They're trying to limit exposure, she added. But the moment we sent that letter, it triggered review on their side. Lenders, county records, possibly insurance audits. I felt something shift again, not fear exactly, but the weight of consequence becoming real. This is going to get bigger before it gets clearer, isn't it? Yes, she didn't soften it. That's usually what happens when something like this stops being private. After the call, I sat there for a long time without moving. Up until now, everything had lived in controlled spaces. A conference room, my kitchen table, a phone call that ended when I decided it did. Now, there were other eyes on it. Systems. People whose job it was to follow inconsistencies until they made sense. That afternoon, my phone started ringing. First, my mother. I didn't answer. Then again, then a text. We need to talk. Not we should talk. Not can we talk. We need to talk. I turned the phone face down on my desk. An hour later, Noah called. I hadn't heard from him since before the wedding. Not even a message. Ava, he said, when I picked up his voice tight. What are you doing?
I think it.
That's a pretty big question, I said. You've got lawyers involved. You sent something official, he pressed. Mom said this is getting out of control. Out of control. The words echoed something my mother had said. It's already out of control, I said. I just didn't see it before. He exhaled sharply. You're going to drag this through the system over paperwork. Paperwork? I almost laughed. This isn't paperwork, I said. It's my name. There was a pause. Then quieter. You're going to make them lose everything. There it was. Not denial, not justification. Consequence. I'm asking for what's mine to be accounted for, I said. That's all. That's not how this is going to play out, he said. You know that. Maybe I did. Maybe I didn't. But I knew something else. For years, every decision had been made with the assumption that I would absorb it, that I would adjust, that I would stay quiet because it was easier than disrupting what already existed. Now the system was moving, and systems didn't care about family logic. They cared about records, signatures, consistency. When the call ended, I realized something I hadn't fully allowed myself to see before. This wasn't just about uncovering what had been done. It was about what it would cost to let it stay hidden. And for the first time, that cost wasn't mine alone to carry. By Thursday afternoon, the panic had changed shape. It was no longer coming through missed calls and short, sharp texts. It had moved into the careful language of attorneys' scheduled meetings and controlled rooms where everyone pretended they were there to solve a problem instead of admit one. Megan arranged the meeting at her office downtown. I almost said no, not because I was afraid to see my parents, but because I knew exactly how these conversations had worked my entire life. My mother would lower her voice and call herself practical. My father would say very little and let silence do half the work. By the end, I would leave carrying the weight of everyone else's comfort like it was mine to manage. But that pattern depended on one thing: no record, no witness, no paper in front of us. This time, we had all three. Megan's conference room was colder than it needed to be. The long walnut table divided the room so neatly it felt intentional. Ethan sat beside me, steady and quiet. Across from us were my parents. Diane looked immaculate, as if appearance could still organize reality. Richard looked like he had aged another 5 years in 1 week. Beside them sat their attorney, a gray-haired man with a careful voice and an expensive pen he kept lining up with the edge of his legal pad. No one mentioned my wedding. No one mentioned the empty chairs. That was the first thing I noticed. They wanted the story to begin where the paperwork began, as if injury only counted once it could be tabbed, copied, and billed. Megan did not let them set that tone for long. She walked through the records one by one: Williamson County, Travis County, property management agreements, refinance documents, insurance records. My name attached to structures I had never authorized, benefits I had never received, liabilities I had never agreed to carry. Their attorney interrupted twice to call the arrangements informal family planning. Megan slid another document across the table each time. By the third interruption, even he stopped trying to make it sound harmless. My mother was the first one to break. Not with an apology, with irritation. "You're making this uglier than it needs to be," Diane said, looking directly at me instead of at the papers. "Families help each other. That's what we did. Noah needed support. We managed what we had." There it was again. Managed. Needed. The same language, polished smooth by repetition. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized she still believed the problem. Here was my refusal to cooperate, not what they had done. "You didn't ask," I said. Her expression tightened. We were keeping things afloat. With my name, my father shifted in his chair, but he still didn't step in. That silence used to confuse me. As a child, I had mistaken it for discomfort. Later, I told myself it was weakness. Now I understood it for what it really was. Consent without fingerprints. Megan placed the release form in the center of the table. The issue is no longer whether these arrangements were convenient for the family, she said. The issue is whether Ms. Bennett's identity and legal interest were used without informed consent over a period of years. No one answered. For the first time, the room stopped feeling emotional and started feeling factual. That shift mattered more than anger ever could. Anger could be dismissed. Records could not. Their attorney cleared his throat and folded his hands. "I think," he said carefully, "it may be in everyone's interest to discuss resolution before this proceeds any further." My mother turned toward him, startled. My father closed his eyes for half a second, and I understood something before anyone said it aloud. They had walked into that room hoping to contain this. Instead, they had just heard the first professional voice in the room acknowledge that it could no longer be contained. The first offer came in on a Tuesday morning. Megan forwarded it without commentary. Just a short message asking if I was free to talk. I stepped out of my office during lunch and called her from the parking lot, sitting in my car with the air conditioning running harder than it needed to. "They want to settle quietly," she said. Of course they did. I stared through the windshield at the row of faculty cars baking in the Texas heat. How quiet. They're offering to remove your name from the active liabilities, transfer your interest in the Williamson County property into a cash equivalent, and close out the Travis County issue through sale proceeds. The language was clean, controlled, designed to sound administrative instead of desperate. "And what does that actually mean?" I asked. "It means," Megan said, "they don't have enough liquid cash to fix this without selling." For a second, I said nothing. I thought about my mother's voice on the phone, telling me I was making this uglier than it needed to be. I thought about Noah saying I was going to make them lose everything. Not everything, I thought, just the part they'd built on the assumption that I would never object. Megan continued, "Their attorney wants a release once funds are transferred. Full and final resolution. No admission of wrongdoing." There it was, the shape of the ending they wanted. Money out, silence restored, paperwork sealed. "What happens if we don't agree?" I asked. "We continue. County review stays active. Lender questions stay active. Insurance discrepancies stay in play. It gets slower, more public, and more expensive." I understood then that karma, in real life, rarely arrived like thunder. It arrived like pressure, like a structure leaning too far in one direction for too many years until the weight finally demanded correction. "I want accounting on both properties," I said. "Not just numbers they summarize. I want dates, transfers, refinance use, everything." Megan didn't hesitate. "Good. That's the right next step." The documents came 2 days later. I read them at our kitchen table, with Ethan after dinner, page by page, the way we had gone through the first brown folder. Only this time, the pattern was no longer something I had to interpret. It was laid out in columns, dates, and amounts. Mortgage proceeds had been redirected. Rental income had been used to cover personal expenses. My name had strengthened loan structures I never benefited from. It wasn't one moment, it was years, and the consequence of that history was finally simple. They could not keep the properties and make this go away at the same time. By Friday, the second offer came in. Higher, clearer, less confident. The Williamson County house would be sold. My legal interest would be bought out at a value calculated from equity proceeds and documented use of my name. The Travis County property would be liquidated as part of the resolution package. All outstanding obligations tied to my name would be removed in writing. Deadlines were attached this time. That mattered. Deadlines meant pressure had moved from us to them. My father called that evening. I let it ring twice before answering. When he spoke, his voice sounded older than I had ever heard it. "This has gone far enough," he said. I looked out the kitchen window into the dark backyard. Ethan was at the sink behind me, rinsing dishes without turning around. "No," I said quietly. "It's finally gone far enough for me to see it." He exhaled hard. "Your mother is packing boxes." I closed my eyes. Not because I felt guilty, because I understood exactly what he was trying to do. He was trying to move the story out of documents and back into emotion, back into the old place, where my discomfort mattered more than their choices. "I didn't put her in that position," I said. "You did, years ago." He didn't answer. For the first time in my life, there was nothing left for him to say that could make me carry this differently. When the call ended, I stood there a long time, with the phone still in my hand. The highest point of tension wasn't victory. It was this, knowing the truth had moved so far into the real world that it now had an address, a deadline, and a price, and knowing they were the ones being forced to live inside it. The final agreement was signed on a Monday morning. No raised voices, no last-minute arguments, just paper signatures and a quiet understanding that there was nothing left to negotiate. The Williamson County house had already gone under contract the week before. The Travis County property followed soon after. Proceeds were calculated, verified, and transferred in 2 structured payments, each one documented with more care than anything I had ever signed in my life. My name was removed from every liability, every loan, every line that had once tied me to something I didn't choose. Megan walked me through the final documents one last time, her voice steady, precise. "This closes everything," she said. "There are no remaining obligations attached to you." That word obligations felt different now. For years it had meant something unspoken, something assumed. Now it meant exactly what it said, nothing more. When I left her office, I didn't feel relief the way I thought I would. I felt quiet. Not empty, not numb. Just quiet. like something that had been running in the background for a long time had finally stopped. My parents didn't call. There was no message, no attempt to reopen anything, no effort to reshape the story one last time. The system had done what conversations never could. It had made everything visible, measurable, and final. I heard through Noah weeks later that they had moved into a smaller rental on the edge of town. 2 bedrooms, no investment properties, no leverage built on someone else's name. Just what was left when everything was accounted for. He didn't say it like an accusation, just a fact. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to respond to it. Ethan and I used the first payment to clear our student loans. Every statement, every monthly balance that had followed me since my early 20s gone. Not erased from memory, but no longer shaping what came next. The second payment became something else, not a replacement for what I lost. Something I chose. We bought a small house just outside Austin. Nothing dramatic. 2 bedrooms, a front porch that caught the late afternoon light, hardwood floors that creaked in a way that felt honest. The first time I stood in the doorway, holding the keys in my hand, I thought about those 2 empty chairs. How visible that absence had been. How undeniable. This felt different. Not because something had been filled in, but because nothing here depended on who chose to show up. A few weeks later, I set up a small education fund in my own name. Nothing large, nothing that would make headlines, just enough to cover a semester or 2 for students who were doing what I had done, working balancing, figuring things out without a safety net. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't need them to understand it. That wasn't the point. The point was that I did. I understood what had been taken. I understood what had been returned. And most importantly, I understood what I would do differently with it. Sometimes late in the evening, when the house is quiet and the light fades across the porch, I think about the version of myself who walked down that aisle. The one who kept going even when something didn't make sense. The one who thought silence meant there was nothing to question. She didn't disappear. She just learned. And what she learned changed everything that came after. Not in a way that erased the past, but in a way that made it stop defining the future. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and telling the truth, I'd really like to hear how you handled it. Share your thoughts below, and if this story resonated with you, consider staying for more stories like this.